I'm Alex Batchelor. I'm one of the interns at the Cirque Research Station in Abisko this year. And with me today is Professor Ruth Varner, who is a professor at the University of New Hampshire in America. You're a professor of both the Earth Systems Research Center and also for the Department of Earth Sciences, I believe.
Yeah.
And also a director of the Joan and James Lietzell Center for Mathematics, Science and Engineering Education.
Yes, I have a lot of titles.
So thank you for joining me today. I was wondering if we could start off, if you could go back to when you were first deciding that you wanted to pursue a scientific career and what made you want to be a scientist.
Well, thanks, Alex. I was thinking about this today, partly because when I started my college career, I was actually an English major. I was going to be a writer. And so I was thinking about talking to you today and sort of how my path changed after that. I was pretty good in science and math in high school, but I didn't really have an idea of what a scientist might be and didn't really have anyone to talk to about it besides my teachers, who were all men, of course. And so when I went to college, I was really thinking that I wanted to be a teacher. I was very interested in that. My mom was a teacher and I was quite good at English and writing. And then I did an internship with a 7th grade class. So I think maybe 13-year-old students for a couple weeks. And then I decided there was no way I could ever do that. They were wonderful, but I had no control over any of them. So it was just very scary. And I had taken a geology class my freshman year and decided to do I was very lucky that my university had a January term course where they took you could go on a trip for 4 weeks. And we went to the Grand Canyon in the US and then to Hawaii. And it was a geology course. And I learned about, the geologic history of the Grand Canyon. And then we got to be in Hawaii where the newest rocks on the earth were forming. And it just was, I think it was a magical moment where I just decided this is totally what I want to do. And what I really liked about geology and earth science is that it sort of combines all of the sciences. So you have to learn chemistry and biology, and you need to know physics and a lot of math. And I really enjoyed the fact that it kind of brought all of that together. And so then I switched my major when I was halfway through college. So it was pretty interesting. And then graduate school just made sense because I just kept wanting to learn more. And so I was really interested in environmental geology. So things like contamination of water and, trying to understand how we as humans are impacting the earth. And so that's kind of how I ended up with hydrology at University of New Hampshire and then into what I'm doing now.
It's really interesting that you didn't originally start out wanting to be a scientist, but you found your path while you're at uni. I think a lot of people think that you pick what you're going to do as your major or as your degree, and that's it. But you can change, and that is really great to hear that it worked out for you.
It worked out, yeah.
So you said you did hydrology and then you moved on to do a PhD and go to graduate school. And you now study trace gas biochemistry, I believe. And you have taken your research to the Abisko station. When did you first visit Abisko?
So my first trip to Sweden and to Abisko was in 2010. And so I've been able to travel there for the last 10 years, which has been amazing. And I really just visited, I had a colleague from Stockholm University who was my former PhD advisor, and he had thought that it would be nice for me to see the research that was going on there. And so I was able to get a small grant from my university to pay for my travel. And I was writing proposals and thinking about bringing undergraduates to do research there. And that sort of kicked off my research at the site, and also my attempt to bring a lot of students to see this beautiful landscape and to be able to do research at the station.
Um, so I was having a look at your research, and you, while you were at the station, you were involved in the Stordalen permafrost mire project, which I think has been running for. Did you help set that up, or was that already running when
So
you joined the
yeah,
station?
so the thing about the mire is that there are a lot of different researchers there. So I think that honestly, the research goes back to the 1970s. So I definitely wasn't part of that. But I've been there about 10 years. Some of the automated systems where they've been making measurements have been there much longer, so 20, 25 years. So I was able to get funding to do research there over the last 10 years in different projects.
Could you possibly share a bit more of the details about the type of measurements that you're taking and how that relates to climate change?
Yeah, so I've been involved in several different projects. So one in particular has been a graduate student of mine, Sophia Burke, who just recently finished her dissertation. She started working with me as an undergraduate, and what we were looking at was trying to understand how much methane, which is a strong greenhouse gas, is emitted from these areas where the permafrost is thawing. So as the permafrost thaws, the surface of the landscape subsides, and what you often get is the formation of what are called thaw ponds, so small bodies of water that are pretty shallow, but these are areas that, because they thawed, they become places where microbes can start to work on decomposing that carbon that's been stored there for a really long time. It becomes anaerobic, so there's no oxygen, and so it's a perfect place for these microbes that produce methane to be active. And so what we did was really, for over about an 8-year period, measure how much methane was being emitted from these places that are really ponds or bodies of water at the mire. And so we've seen that depending on the size of the pond, the depth of the pond, and the types of vegetation that are around it, that really impacts the amount of methane that's coming out of these, what we call sort of hot spots of methane emission in the landscape.
Um, did you use any specialized equipment? I know lots of people always think that scientists are all about like test tubes and things, but when you're in the field, you've got to be using something different.
Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of fun one of the things that I've always really enjoyed about being a scientist in the field that I'm in is that I've been able to spend a lot of time developing different techniques to measure stuff. So it kind of looks like a high school, I don't know if you did this in high school, but like a science fair project or something. But the way that we basically measure emissions from these ponds is we take a funnel and we invert it. So it's an upside down funnel, and we float it in the pond, and then we pull samples off that on a daily or every 2-day period. And then we pull those samples and we take them back to the research station, and then we analyze the gas that's accumulated using a gas chromatograph. And so it's a pretty simple design, and it's what's nice is you can make it out of sort of regularly available items like foam and funnels. But it's really the analysis of the gas itself that's the more complex technique, and that you really want to measure well. And a big part of the research that we do is that it's continuous, so you need to be out there every day. So if you don't have an automated system, it's a lot of labor for people. But the idea is that if you're making measurements every day over multiple years, so like 8 to 10 years, you get a really good idea of what's happening and how the system might be changing. And so those are really important things to know as a scientist, is that you often make a lot of repeated measurements, but you don't really mind so much when you're up in Abisko because it's so beautiful to be out in the field, except when there's bugs, I guess.
um, as it's you're up where there's permafrost, you are in an Arctic location. Were there any challenges you had to overcome because it's an Arctic location? I mean, cold, I would assume, is primarily one, but do you run into any other problems?
You know, I think the reason that that I chose to work in Abisko, I mean, there's a number of reasons. Partly because there's a research station there that's been there since the early 1900s. So they've been making measurements and monitoring the climate for a really long time. So then you can put your measurements into that longer term context. But also because it's a great place to be able to take students when it's like their first field experience, because there's a place to live, there's showers, and it's a kitchen, and you can be comfortable after you've been in the field all day. I really haven't had too many challenges. I think the station has been really welcoming to us and supportive of our research. And I feel like the other scientists that I meet, we always have really great conversations about what they're doing and what they're learning and what we're learning. And so it's been a really nice way to find new collaborators, and also to show the undergraduates that I bring who've not done research before kind of how collaborative research has to be for us to understand these ecosystems. I think the only challenge occasionally, like we have to go out on a boat and row around, and sometimes it's super windy and you actually can't row fast enough to get to where you need to be. So I'm usually challenged by some of those physical things we have to do, but the station or the mire is pretty accessible. And occasionally you might step in the wrong spot and get in up to your waist in water, but that sort of comes with the territory, I guess. And luckily it's very close to the station, so if anything like that happens, you can head back in and change your clothes.
Sorry, I'm stuck on the idea of just falling into
Yeah,
a bog.
it happens to me pretty regularly. So I don't know, I'm not very coordinated. So at least everyone else with me feels better because they don't usually fall in.
I'm just wondering if you've worked at any other research stations that have permafrost, and what are they like? Are they similar to Abisko, or are you not having the nice warm station to go back to?
Yeah, so a lot of Arctic research sites are, I would say, considerably more remote. And even though, we talk about Abisko as being, 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, so it makes it sound remote, but I guess because that part of Sweden is a tourist destination for hiking and a lot of skiing in the winter and the northern lights, um, it's actually a pretty cushy place to be doing research. I've been to a few other locations in Alaska and also in northern Canada that have been a little bit less accessible, and so you have to camp, and you have to be maybe worried about other animals that are around. um, but I would say that I have focused a lot of my work in the last 10 years really in Sweden, and I do have a project funded by NASA in the US where we've gone to other research sites, but unfortunately, I haven't been able to go to them. I send grad students and technicians who get to go to those. So I've seen lots of pictures, but I would say, permafrost across the Arctic, those ecosystems can look very different. And I would say that Stordalen is a pretty unique place with respect to the vegetation and the type of permafrost ecosystem it is. A lot of other places may have trees, and so when you go to Stordalen, hopefully you'll get there. That definitely you don't see a lot of large trees, but it's really because of the latitude. So
Really cool that you have funding from NASA. I forget
yeah.
that they fund stuff about Earth as well as about space.
Yep. Yeah, so we work with a lot of people who use satellite data, so remote sensing data, to look at the Earth and try to understand, the like wetland and Arctic ecosystems. And so it's been really fun to be the person on the ground making the measurements and then talking with the people who look at the ground from space, and trying to tie those together.
I was just wondering, what's your favourite memory of your time at Abisko? It doesn't have to be a science memory, but
Yeah, it probably isn't in some ways, but I think the what I really it may not be one memory in particular, but what I really enjoy is when you drive up from Kiruna, you fly into Kiruna and you rent cars, and I often have like 10 people with me because I'm taking all these undergrads there, and I have been able to take my children as well, which has been really nice. And you drive up there, and once you get very close to Abisko, you see the gateway to Lapland. Um, and it's just the most spectacular, like U-shaped glacial valley. And you come around this corner, and everyone just like stops talking, and they are just so impressed with how beautiful it is up there. And it just, many of these students have never been out of the US, and many of them hadn't even flown, honestly, before we left. And so it's just such an amazing moment where they're just in awe of and then they're like, yes, this was a good idea to come, and they're excited. But I think those moments of introducing it to other people have been really special. And then there's the sauna. That's always nice too. After a long day in the field.
I'm so jealous. I forget next year.
You're gonna get there, I promise, at some point.
I was also hoping to ask you a bit about you've worked as a mentor for quite a few people, not just undergrads and postgrads. You're also involved in professional development for, I think it's kindergarten through grade 12 teachers, to improve STEM teaching, and there's something called the Next Generation Science Standards, which I think are also about improving STEM teaching.
Yeah, yep.
And I was just interested, because you said you were considering being a teacher. Is that something that, you know, you've kept the interest in teaching even if you decided it wasn't necessarily for you?
Yeah, I think that's probably part of why I work with teachers. I think another thing that I learned through one program that we had funded was that, or was reminded that, is when you think about your, say, high school, or I don't, secondary school teachers, if they're biologists or chemists, they're teaching you physics, I don't know. But I think what you maybe forget is that they were scientists first before they became teachers, right? So they had this really strong interest in this scientific field, whether it's biology or chemistry. And so what I really enjoy doing is working with teachers to like remind them that's who they were first, and then give them some opportunities to do research, which they may not have done in college. And then they get so excited about that, like being engaged in that research, and then being able to take that back to their classrooms and do research with their students. So thinking about high school kids or middle school children being able to do research with their teachers, and then coming to talk with us about it, and linking the university and those schools is kind of the part that I really enjoy.
I think it's really great that you want to improve the teaching at the school level, because it could be very easy as a university professor to just focus on university. So I think that's
Definitely, yeah.
And you've talked about partnership between your university, letting the schools come to visit and find out what it's like to be a scientist. Do you feel like partnerships like that are beneficial to both sides?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think when some of the programs we have graduate students that are, geoscience graduate students who get to work with teachers on their curriculum, and to bring, some tools into their classroom and to do research with their students. It really opens up their training to this idea of these partnerships when they go on to get a job somewhere else, that it's important to work with your community and be part of it. And I think it's a really great way to do that. And I've seen students really change kind of the trajectory of their careers in some ways, to be more inclusive of K-12 schools. And it really is beneficial to us as educators to work with teachers, because they come to teaching from such a different perspective than we do. And I think we both definitely benefit.
I think we're nearly done, but I have one final question, which is, if you wanted to give some advice to someone considering a career as a scientist or who's early in their career, what would that advice be?
Yeah, so I think what I learned when I was younger and didn't, you know, really come to this later. One is that you really should just talk to people. You should be, get in touch with some faculty or professors and ask them about potential opportunities to do research, because I think once you get involved in research, that can tell you pretty quickly, whether this is the right thing for you. It can really inspire you tremendously. I think that the that sort of field trip that I went on, where we were like really learning about a place and about the science of that place, just made all the difference in the world to me. It was like a moment where I immediately thought, this is what I want to do. Um, but I definitely didn't know that ahead of time. I feel like there's a lot more resources now for people to explore those kinds of things, obviously online right now because it's COVID, but there are a lot of opportunities out there to look at different research programs and to think about trying them out. And there are a lot of programs for undergraduates, especially in the US, and I'm sure in other countries, to do research, funded research. So you get paid and you also get to figure out if it's what you really like. So.
Um, Great. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. I hope you've enjoyed it and enjoyed getting to talk a bit about your career as a scientist. And yeah, just thank you for talking to me today.
You're welcome, Alex. I really enjoyed it too. It's fun to think about how I got here myself. It's not a linear path, so I think that's a good thing for people to know as well.